welcome again to our program. I'm Chris with Tampa Hillsborough County Public Library. How are you doing, Kate?
Just great. I'm so excited to be here with you and all your amazing readers today.
Yes, we are so excited. Now, before Kate starts, I have a few more things I want to share. This program is part of our summer reading. The theme this year is Oceans of Possibilities, and we're very, very excited. We obviously have our author series, which Kate Messner is a part of. We have a lot of other programs, reading challenges and prizes. There's so much you can learn about, and you can find out all about it at our landing page, hcplc.org/summer. So I invite you to go check that out, and I'll post that in the chat right now. So if you want to check that out later, please do. Of course, as you know, you're here to meet Kate Messner, and I will introduce her in just a moment. Just want to let you know that this event was funded by the Tampa Hillsborough County Children's Library Foundation. Without their help, we wouldn't be able to do this. So a big thank you goes out to them. We appreciate their support. And also after the program, if you want to continue the experience, which we think you will, because these books are fantastic. We have lots of Kate's titles in our Overdrive collection. As you see, this is just a sampling of what we have, but if you go to hcplc.org/ebooks, you can go to our Libby Overdrive collection. There's also Hoopla there and a few others, but we encourage you to do that. That's all I have to say. I just want to now turn off my screen and introduce our guest. Kate Messner is a New York Times best-selling author. She's passionately curious and writes books that encourage kids to wonder. Her titles include fiction and nonfiction. She writes award-winning picture books, easy readers, chapter book series, and novels for young readers. Her books are frequently nominated for state award lists and have been honored with the E.B. White Read Aloud Award, Golden Kite and Crystal Kite Awards, River Bee Award for Natural History Writing, and the Nerdy Book Club Awards. If you've read her books, then you'll know that these awards are all very well deserved. We are very honored to have her with us, and I am now going to stop talking and hand things over to you, Kate.
All right, sounds great. I am so excited to be here with all of you today. And I can't tell you how much I love your theme for summer reading this year, Oceans of Possibilities. Because when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I absolutely love to read. I love to be outdoors and I love to read. My two favorite things to do in the summertime. And those two things really have come together in my writing. So I have to tell you, when I was in elementary school, I had one favorite author, and her name was Beverly Cleary. I don't know, maybe some of you have even read some Beverly Cleary books, but this was one of my favorites, Ramona Quimby, age 8. I loved Beverly Cleary's Ramona books. So whenever we went to the library in my town growing up, I always signed out a Ramona Quimby book. But that wasn't the only book I signed out, because the other thing that I loved best of all was nonfiction, true stories, especially true stories about animals, and especially true stories about dangerous animals for some reason. So I would go to the library and I would have my Beverly Cleary Ramona books, and then I would also have books about sharks and venomous snakes and, lions and stuff. And boy, I loved my summer reading. So I hope that some of my books will be part of your summer reading. Those are a lot of the things I write about today, real kids and their issues and people who like to explore. And also one of my favorite things to write about is nature and the animal world. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so you can see some of the books that I have written. As you can see, I write a wide variety of books. I write picture books. I write easy readers for when you're just starting to learn to read short chapter books all by yourself. I write chapter books. I write novels for older elementary school and middle school readers. So honestly, a little bit of everything. The one thing that all those stories have in common is that they all start with an idea, with that spark where you think, wow, wouldn't it be fun to write about this? So I want to share some of those spark moments with you today. One of my very first books started when I was on a school field trip. So I used to be a middle school English teacher, and every winter we would take our students snowshoeing in the Adirondack Mountains of New York State. This is very close to where I live in northern New York. It gets very, very snowy and very, very cold here in January and February. It's beautiful outside right now, but winter here is another story. It's also really beautiful though, even though it's pretty cold. And so when I was teaching middle school kids, every winter we would go snowshoeing in the mountains. We'd take a big field trip and we would snowshoe on these trails through the woods and search for animal tracks and try to figure out, based on the tracks we saw, which animal had left those tracks and what that animal was doing. So for example, these tracks are from a snowshoe hare. And this is one of my favorite animals in the winter woods because snowshoe hares have a superpower. They have the superpower of invisibility. If you see this rabbit in the summertime, like right now in the woods, it won't look like this. It'll be all brown, the color of dry grass and leaves. But if you see one in the winter, it's all white, the color of snow. And if you are a snowshoe hare, that's a great thing to be able to do because it means that no matter the season, you can blend in with your environment and be a little bit harder for predators to find and eat for lunch. I love learning about how different animals adapt to their environment. And so this other thing that we saw on our field trip also fascinated me. We were hiking along and all of a sudden our guide, our naturalist who was with us said, "Oh my goodness, look at this. We have had a visitor from the subnivean zone." Now, we all saw this little tiny hole in the snow with little bitty tracks leading up to it, and we thought, the subnivean zone, what is that? So our guide went on to explain that the subnivean zone is the fancy phrase we use to describe the secret network of tunnels and caves under the winter snow, and that all the smallest animals in the forest, little chipmunks and moles and voles, little deer mice and red squirrels, know they can go down there to be a little bit safer from predators, a little bit warmer, maybe even find some leftover food. I was fascinated by this idea, so much so that I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole time we were hiking. And finally, another mile later on our snowshoe field trip, I turned to the guide and I said, "I'm sorry, can you just clarify something for me? Are you saying that the whole time we've been hiking through the woods today, like 2 or 3 miles, there's been a secret invisible world going on down there?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Whoa, that is so cool." And I have to tell you, my writer's imagination lit up in a big way. So that day, when I got back to the school bus at the end of the field trip, I took attendance, made sure all the students were there. And then on the school bus, in my bumpy school bus handwriting, I actually wrote the rough draft of a picture book that many, many rewrites later would become this book, Over and Under the Snow, the story of a girl who goes cross-country skiing with her dad and discovers that secret world of animals under the snow. Now, I'm the author of this book, and that means that I wrote the words. I'm not the illustrator, and that means I did not draw the pictures. For that job, the publisher hired this guy. His name is Christopher Silas Neal, and Chris is an artist who lives in New York City. So it was his job to read my words. Over the snow I glide, into woods, frosted, fresh, and white. And imagine what art, what scene should go with those words. And this is what he came up with, this snowy winter scene. So Chris and I since then have worked together on several other books in the Over and Under series, Up in the Garden and Down in the Dirt, which is all about the secret world of a vegetable garden. We did one called Over and Under the Pond, about the secret life of a mountain pond. And then we did one called Over and Under the Rainforest. So this book was a little bit different. It was exploring an ecosystem not quite so close to home for Chris and me, who both live in the Northeast. For this book, I had to do some research. That's when you have to learn something, you have to go find out all about something so you can write about it. So for this book, part of my research involved traveling to a real tropical rainforest. I took a trip to Costa Rica and spent about a week hiking through the rainforest with guides, learning all about the amazing animals that live there. So we saw on this trip, I say we because my family sometimes likes to come along when I have a cool research trip, but we saw so many amazing animals. There were toucans. We would see these every morning. We'd get up early and go for a walk, and these toucans would be squawking at one another, bickering over breakfast in the trees. There were lots of different kinds of monkeys, including these white-throated capuchin monkeys. We'd see them swinging around on the branches. There were howler monkeys too. We saw bats. Now, bats are nocturnal, which means they're out feeding at night. So in the daytime, when we were out hiking, we would see these bats lined up on the tree, just kind of hanging out and resting. One of my favorite animals in the rainforest were the snakes, because there were so many different kinds of snakes, including some venomous snakes that we would see right on the trail when we were hiking. I did tell you, right? When I was a kid, I was obsessed with dangerous animals. So this was pretty cool. We would be hiking along and our guide would say, "Oh, hold up, let's stay back. We have a fer de lance on the trail." That's what this snake is. It's one of the most dangerous snakes in all of Latin America. So we gave this guy plenty of space to be safe. And then I loved Costa Rica's poison dart frogs. This one is a green and black poison dart frog. These little guys are so colorful. They're about the size of a quarter and come in so many bright colors. So we've got the green and black poison dart frog. And this little guy, they sometimes like to call this one the blue jeans poison dart frog. I bet you can guess why, right? Because this poison dart frog has a bright red upper body, but its legs and hindquarters are dark blue, as if it's wearing a pair of blue jeans. And then, of course, there were amazing insects in the rainforest as well, like these leaf cutter ants. We would see these marching by the thousands, all in a single file line through the rainforest, with each tiny ant carrying a little piece of a leaf or a petal back to the nest. So all of those amazing animals found their way into this book, Over and Under the Rainforest. After this book, Chris and I decided we would write another one that explores the secret world of a desert canyon. So Over and Under the Canyon has really cool animals like coyotes and roadrunners and rattlesnakes, all the animals that live in the desert Southwest, even scorpions that glow in the dark. And then our next book in the series comes out at the end of the summer in September, and it fits your summer reading theme perfectly. You're going to get a little sneak peek today, even though nobody else gets to read it yet. And that book is Over and Under the Waves. So this is about ocean life, marine life. And when I was doing my research for this book, I spent some time on the Pacific Ocean coast, actually, the opposite ocean from where you are in Florida. So Over and Under the Waves is all about the kelp forests of Monterey Bay in California. So for my research, I did a lot of reading. I visited some museums and aquariums, but I also headed out on the bay in a kayak to kind of soak up the atmosphere and see not just what animals live there, but what is this place that I'm writing about look like when you're there? And what does it smell like? And what does the air feel like? And what is it like to go out kayaking with sea otters and sea lions and things? They got pretty close to me in the kayak. Pretty friendly and curious. So, getting splashed by a sea lion who's hanging out kayaking with you and listening to them bark was all part of that experience. Of course, the sea otters are one of my favorite marine animals, so they found their way into the story. I also spent some time at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, because they have this kelp forest exhibit that allows you a different view of Monterey Bay's kelp forest than you see when you're kayaking over them. So I was able to take a closer look at all the amazing animals, the leopard sharks and decorator crabs. This is a crab that has disguised itself by literally Velcroing little bits of seaweed and pebbles and shells and anemones onto its shell, so it blends in with the rocks. And then my favorite animal, I don't often admit to having a favorite animal in these Over and Under books, but well, I gotta tell you, my favorite animal at the Monterey Bay Aquarium was the giant Pacific octopus. I just loved this octopus, and usually it's hiding. so you don't always get to see it. But I was actually able to watch this octopus, and an octopus can change color to blend in with its environment. So when it tucked itself up against those gray rocks, it wasn't red anymore. It was so amazing to see how that looked in real life. So that is Over and Under the Waves, which will be out in September. And there's going to be another book in the series after that, and I have some fun news for you. I don't have a cover to show you yet because Chris is still making the art for the cover, but I will tell you that this one is going to be of special interest because it's set where you live. It's going to be called Over and Under the Wetlands, and it explores the swamplands of South Florida. Hey, do you want to, we should read a little bit of Over and Under the Waves, shouldn't we? Should we get a little, do you want to see a little bit more about what this book is going to be? I think I'll read you the very beginning, all right? So don't tell anybody about this, even though, well, I'm telling everybody, I guess. We'll read a little bit of the story to get a little sneak preview. Over and Under the Waves by Kate Messner, with art by Christopher Silas Neal. Over the waves we paddle, away from the beach to the water's deep blue. Sea lions bark from the rocks. One slips into the water. Whoosh, flip, sploosh. She dives beneath our boats and disappears into the deep. Where did she go? I ask. Out to the bay, Mom says. Under the waves is a whole hidden forest full of silver fish and squid, bat stars and sea anemones. We're paddling over them now. So again, some of my favorite ocean animals make it into this book. There are the sea otters and the urchins. The octopus is going to be in there. And then another one of my favorites, the humpback whales. So after this book, we will have Over and Under the Wetlands, which is set in the swamplands of South Florida, where I actually spend quite a bit of time. I kind of split my time between Northern New York and Florida. So I sort of get to live in both places, which is pretty amazing. And I have to tell you, I love the Everglades and the Fakahatchee Strand and, all the swamplands of South Florida. Have always been fascinated by the animals that live there. And so Over and Under the Wetland is going to explore that ecosystem. It was actually inspired by the swamplands around Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary outside of Naples, Florida. And this book is going to include lots of Florida's amazing swampy plant and animal life. So, plants like the ghost orchid that lives in the swamps, the strangler figs that you see wrapped around the trees, and then all of our favorite swamp animals, the snakes and birds and turtles, and of course, the alligators. So that book, like I said, I only have photographs from my research to show you right now because Chris is still working on the art, but that book is scheduled to come out in 2024. So still a couple years away for that one. I want to tell you about another one of my books that's set in Florida as well. The Brilliant Deep is a book that came about, the spark for this book happened when I was reading an article about a group called the Coral Restoration Foundation. The book is called The Brilliant Deep, Rebuilding the World's Coral Reefs. And this is the organization I was reading about when I had the idea for this book. It's about a group trying to save Florida's coral reefs down in the Keys. And so when I read this article, I did what I usually do when I have an interesting idea for a book. I make a note in my writer's notebook. This is where I collect things. It's where I save ideas so I can think about them and maybe learn more and write about them later on. So I made the note about this, and then I kind of went back to my life. And a few months later, I was visiting my mom and dad in Florida, and I went snorkeling with my family. We took a day trip to Key Largo and went snorkeling and got to see some of the amazing corals and the fish that live there. And on the drive back from that snorkeling trip, we were driving along and we saw a sign on a building that said Coral Restoration Foundation. And I said, hey, stop the car. And my husband said, what, are you okay? Is everything all right? And I said, yes, everything's fine. But can you please turn around? Because I want to go back and see what that building is. Well, it turns out, my husband, by the way, great guy, was kind of alarmed, but he's used to being married to a very curious writer. So he turned the car around. We went back, and it turned out this building was the headquarters for the Coral Restoration Foundation, that group that I had read about. And so we were able to go in and have a tour and learn all about the work that this group does trying to restore Florida's coral reefs. And one of the most interesting things I learned that day was about how the group got started. The whole thing started with a science experiment. And so the founder is this gentleman. His name is Ken Edemeyer. And the story of The Brilliant Deep is a story about coral and about how Ken had an idea. So the book starts off talking about how coral grows in the ocean, but it also talks about how Ken grew up on Florida's Space Coast. His dad worked for the space program, so he was, always into science, but he especially loved the ocean. He loved snorkeling and scuba diving. And in his lifetime, he saw the reefs in Florida start to change. If you know anything at all about coral reefs, you know that they've been struggling lately because of climate change and pollution and other situations, and they're having a real hard time. So Ken noticed this change in his lifetime, and he wanted to do something about it. So he wondered, what would happen if you took a little piece of coral, sticorn coral, which is one of the endangered species of coral, and you attached it to a rock underwater? Could you take a little piece of coral and use it to grow more coral, the way you might take a cutting from a house plant and put that in water so it would grow roots and you could have another plant? So Ken did this experiment with his daughter. It was part of a 4-H project, and they found out that you could actually grow coral that way. And they were fascinated. And then they decided to do another experiment. They wondered what would happen if you grew some coral like that and you took it in a boat and went out to one of those dying coral reefs and then went scuba diving and used a special underwater glue to attach that coral to the reef. Would it grow? And would more coral grow? And might that help the reefs begin to recover? So Ken and his daughter did this experiment, and they found out that it worked. So that was the beginning of the Coral Restoration Foundation, this group that now helps communities all over the world work to restore their coral reefs as well. So one idea led to this whole story, and in Ken's case, one idea led to this whole organization that helps coral reefs all over the world. I also want to tell you a little bit about my Fergus and Zeke books, because these are also really great books for people who are curious. And I have a feeling we have a lot of curious readers watching today. So Fergus and Zeke is an easy reader series. It's perfect for when you're just starting to read chapter books all by yourself. Fergus and Zeke are mice who are classroom pets in Miss Maxwell's room. And so they love school. They love to do everything the kids do. And in the first book, the kids are taking a field trip to the Natural History Museum. So Fergus decides he's going to sneak out and go on the field trip too. You can see him in the illustration there, Heather Ross's illustration. He's stowing away in Emma's backpack. So the inspiration for this book, for the setting, came from the real Museum of Natural History in New York City, a museum that I love and have visited many, many times. And when I went to visit to do research for this book, I did something a little bit different. Usually when I go to a museum, I bring my writer's notebook just in case I have an idea. But this time I brought my writer's notebook and I walked all around the museum and I tried to imagine what it would look like if I were a little tiny mouse. So what would this big entrance hall feel like if I were Fergus, if I were, 3 inches tall? What would I be thinking? I decided I would probably be thinking, whoa, that is a big dinosaur. And also, hey, I better be careful I don't get stepped on. It's pretty crowded here. And I did that all through the museum. I wondered, okay, what if I got into the gorilla exhibit, or the, I might pretend I was a gorilla too. Or if I got into the elephant exhibit, maybe I would want to climb on those elephants. And so this is exactly what happens in the story. When Fergus and Zeke went to the museum, they crept through the grass like tigers. They beat their chests like gorillas. They climbed all the way up the elephant's tail, then whoosh, they slid down its bumpy trunk. So what about you? I have a question for you. What if you were a tiny mouse and you got to go into the Hall of Dinosaurs, where they have the huge skeletons from, the Brontosaurus and the Tyrannosaurus Rex? Might you want to climb on those skeletons like a jungle gym? I know that's what I would want to do if I were a mouse. And so that's what happens in the story. Fergus and Zeke start at the T-Rex's toes, and they climb all the way up into its mouth full of pointy teeth. From there, they can look out over the whole museum, which is really cool, except they see something that is very uncool. The class is about to leave without them, and they're going to be left behind. So they have to try and scramble down from that dinosaur and find their way through the whole museum to get back to the school bus on time. So I'm not going to tell you how this one ends. You might need to check this one out of the library to find out about that. Other books in the Fergus and Zeke series include Fergus and Zeke at the Science Fair, Fergus and Zeke and the Field Day Challenge, and Fergus and Zeke and the 100th Day of School. Now, I know that some of you are also reading longer chapter books, and I bet some of you have read some of the Ranger in Time books as well. This is my series about a time-traveling search and rescue dog. So Ranger is a golden retriever who's been trained to track missing people by following their scent. And one day he's digging in the family garden and he unearths this magical old first aid kit that allows him to time travel. So then he can go anywhere in history where people could use his modern day search and rescue skills. So for the first book in this series, Ranger goes back in time to the days of the Oregon Trail. That's the time period in America in the 1840s and 50s and 60s when lots of pioneers were traveling west by covered wagon, usually looking for better farmland in the Oregon Territory. To write this series, I had to do piles and piles of research because, first of all, I had to learn how search and rescue dogs work. How do they track missing people by following their scent? So I spent some time reading training manuals for these special helper dogs, and I spent some time with some real canine search and rescue dogs in northern New York, where I live. But then I also had to research every historical time period I was going to write about. If Ranger is going to time travel to a place, that means Kate needs to know all about life in that place and what happened in history. So for the first book, Rescue on the Oregon Trail, I did a lot of reading, and then I took a field trip to the National Frontier Trails Museum in Independence, Missouri. This town was a jumping off point for the Oregon Trail in the 1800s. It was where people would go to make sure their oxen had enough grass to eat. They'd buy their supplies, load up their wagons before they set off on that long journey across the prairie. Today in Independence, there's this museum that's all about the Oregon Trail. So you can go there and check out real covered wagons. You can see a replica trading post, so you can see what it would have been like to go and pick up all your supplies for the Oregon Trail. And best of all, this museum has a research library, a whole library just dedicated to the Oregon Trail. And they have lots and lots of books, including some books that have never even been published. They have handwritten diaries. Believe it or not, you can go to this museum and read people's diaries from the 1800s. I have to tell you, when you get to read the actual handwriting of those pioneers, well, it's a little like listening to the voices of ghosts. We call this a primary source when you get to read about history from the actual people who lived that history. And boy, when I was reading these diaries, I collected so many details about the Oregon Trail in my notebook to then use in the story. One of the writers wrote that one night when they stopped for the night and got their wagons ready to sleep, the mosquitoes in the air were so thick that they got in the bread dough the lady was making and turned the bread dough gray. So little protein with your bread that night. Amazing, amazing details in these diaries. And so I try to do this kind of research for every book in the series, but it's different depending on the book because they're all set in different historical time periods. So the second book in the Ranger in Time series is Danger in Ancient Rome. And this one is about the days of gladiators in ancient Rome when these trained professional fighters would go and battle with their weapons to entertain the emperor and the people of Rome at the Colosseum. Book 3 in the series is called Long Road to Freedom. This one is an Underground Railroad story. It's about two enslaved children who try to escape from a tobacco plantation in Maryland and find their way north to freedom. Book 4 in the series is called Race to the South Pole. This one is about Antarctic exploration in the early 1900s. It's literally about these two teams of explorers who were racing to see who could get to the South Pole first. Book 5, Journey Through Ash and Smoke, is set in Viking Age Iceland. Book 6, Escape from the Great Earthquake, is about the 1906 earthquake that absolutely devastated San Francisco, California, and then the fires that swept through that city for 3 more days after the earthquakes. Book 7 in the series is a World War II story. It's called D-Day, Battle on the Beach. It's about the Battle of Normandy toward the end of World War II. Book 8, Hurricane Katrina Rescue, is about the huge hurricane that devastated the city of New Orleans and other parts of the Southeast in 2005. Book 9 is called Disaster on the Titanic, which places Ranger in the middle of the world's most famous ocean disaster when that ship hit the iceberg. Book 10 is a Revolutionary War story called Night of Soldiers and Spies. Book 11 is called Escape from the Twin Towers. It's about what happened in New York City on September 11th, 2001. And then book 12 is another World War II story called Attack on Pearl Harbor, about the Japanese military's attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. That bombing is actually what got the United States involved in World War II. So 12 Ranger and Time books. That was a lot of historical research, and I love research, so that was really fascinating for me. I love spending time in the library just learning about all these different events. But when I was doing research for this series, I noticed something kind of interesting, and that is I realized that some of the stories that I was taught about history when I was growing up in the 1970s and 80s weren't exactly true. They were more myth than what really happened. And then some things that did really happen in history got left out of my history books entirely. And that made me want to write another series about history. And that was the inspiration for this new series called History Smashers. So these books are graphic nonfiction, which means they are nonfiction, 100% true stories told with lots of photographs and illustrations and graphics and comics too. Big chunks of the stories are told through comics. So there are 7 books in this series out now. They're about the Mayflower, women's right to vote, the Underground Railroad, the Titanic, the American Revolution, Pearl Harbor, and then plagues and pandemics. There's actually going to be an 8th book on the way too. That one will be out a little over a year from now, and that book will be called History Smashers, Christopher Columbus and the Taino people, which is all about Columbus's arrival in the Caribbean in 1492 and the people who had already been there for thousands of years before he arrived. So I want to tell you a little bit more about my nonfiction, because I write nonfiction about history and also about science. And this book in particular is science that's pretty close to home for Florida readers. It's called Tracking Pythons, The Quest to Catch an Invasive Predator and Save an Ecosystem. And the spark for this story was a newspaper article that I read in the Naples Daily News. There was a photograph that looked something like this. It was about these snake researchers, these python researchers who were trying to deal with Florida's invasive Burmese pythons. Now, maybe you've read about this in the news too, or heard about it. Florida has a bit of a python problem. Burmese pythons, as you can see, are these enormous snakes. They're beautiful snakes, but they don't belong in Florida. These snakes are native to Southeast Asia, and they were introduced in Florida in a couple different ways. Sometimes people had pythons as pets, and then the pythons got bigger than they wanted, so they just let them go instead of finding a new home for them responsibly. And there were also some hurricanes that damaged breeding centers for exotic pets, and perhaps some more snakes got out then. But whatever happened, by right around the year 2000, scientists discovered that it was way bigger a problem than just a couple snakes being let go. They discovered that these snakes that had escaped or been released had found one another and had families. And those snakes had families. And by the time anybody realized what an issue this was, there were tens of thousands of Burmese pythons living and breeding in South Florida. Why is that a problem? They're nice looking snakes, but they do eat a lot. And right now they are eating a lot of native Florida wildlife. So there's potential that they could even threaten some species that are threatened or endangered in Florida. So this team of scientists was doing something kind of interesting. One of the best ways to keep Burmese pythons from spreading more in Florida is to find the females who are nesting and remove the eggs before they can hatch, because one female python can lay 80, 90, maybe even 100 eggs. So this team of pythons decided that might be a way to go. But the problem is it's really hard to find female pythons and nests. There is someone who's very good at finding them, though, and that is male pythons. So this team of scientists did a really unique experiment. They wondered what would happen if we caught a male python and we took that male python to the vet and attached a radio transmitter, actually implanted that radio transmitter in the python's body. So that transmitter, it's not very big, it's about the size of a tube of chapstick, but it gives off this silent signal. And then the researchers let that python go, and later, when it's mating season, they have an antenna and a receiver that picks up that signal that the radio transmitter inside the python is giving off and turns it into a beep that people can hear. And they use this receiver and antenna to track these pythons that they've released. So when I was working on this book about this project, I was able to go out in the field tracking these giant snakes with this team of scientists. And it's pretty interesting the way it works. You've got this antenna and receiver, and it beeps more loudly when you get close to the giant python that's hiding somewhere in the brush. So quite often we would track the snake to a place where we couldn't even see it. It would be buried so deep in the brush, or maybe even curled up in a gopher tortoise burrow. But what happens is sometimes when scientists track these male snakes, they lead them to females and eggs. And so they're hoping to learn more about pythons through this experiment, but also to try to stop the spread of those invasive species using this really unique technology. So there's one that's right in your own backyard. I actually worked on another book in this series as well. It's turned into a tracking animals series. The next book is Tracking Pythons, the mission to save a Galapagos giant. And this book is about a team of scientists also using radio telemetry and GPS technology with satellites to track one of the oldest living species on the planet, these giant tortoises that live in the Galapagos Islands. And so when I was working on this book, I spent about a week, a little over a week in the Galapagos Islands. So many amazing animals there that don't live anywhere else. There are these marine iguanas that pile up on the rocks and swim in the ocean. There are incredible birds, so many amazing birds. And then, of course, there are the giant tortoises. So I would go out with this team of researchers tracking these giant tortoises because they migrate. They eat this enormous slow-moving animal, hauls itself up and down volcanoes with the season. And scientists want to know when they do that and why they do that and why some tortoises migrate but not others. They also want to know what would happen if the tortoise's migration route were disrupted by farming or development. Could this endangered species be in even more trouble? And so I was able to go out tracking these giant tortoises with the team of scientists to learn more about the work that they do, tracking the tortoises, and really paying attention to their health and their growth over years. So it's kind of cool. These tortoises live well over 100 years old. Some can be approaching 200 years old. So these scientists are working on a project studying tortoises that they know will outlive them. So another generation of scientists is going to have to finish that work. So interesting. And I'll tell you about one more book to bring us back to our theme of the ocean. I don't have a cover to show you because I haven't even gone on the research trip for this one yet. But this summer, I will be starting work on a book called Tracking Great White Sharks. I'll be spending some time with the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy in Cape Cod, going out on a boat to track the great white sharks that have been increasing in number off Cape Cod. I know we see them all up and down the coast, but this research is focused especially on the area around Cape Cod. So that's a little sneak preview of what I'll be working on next. I want to save the rest of our time for your questions, because you know how curious I am with all this research, and I know that you are all pretty curious too. So I bet there are some things that you are still wondering about. So let's open up for questions at this point.
All right, and we do have questions. I'll remind you, if you want to post your questions, there's a control panel section called questions. You can type them in there. And if you're on a phone or a tablet, tap the question mark icon and type in there. All right, thank you, Kate. That was really fun to hear about all the different books you read and write. Let's see, we've got a middle school librarian here with a question. This person says, I'm always asked for recommendations. Of course, I always lead them to your books, but what are some other middle grade authors that you might recommend?
Oh, that's one of my favorite questions. I have so many favorites too. So a few books that a few of my all-time favorites. One of my all-time favorite series for summer reading is The Jumbies by Tracy Batiste. So The Jumbies is a 3-book series about these monsters of Caribbean folklore. They're these really honestly scary monsters that live in the jungle. I didn't read the Jumbies books at night, but I love this series. It's really exciting. So there's the Jumbies and the Jumbie God's Revenge, and 3 books in all, and those are by Tracy Batiste. There's a new book out that came out just this year by Anne Ursu, if you like fantasy, which I do, called The Troubled Girls of Dragomir Academy. That's one of my favorites. There's a book called Operation Sisterhood by Olubemi Solarbude Perkovic that I absolutely love. Let's see, in September, no, not September. That's actually a little bit later. There's a mystery coming from Martha Brockenbrough, middle grade mystery called To Catch a Thief that I love, but it's going to be a little bit later than September. It's not out quite yet. And then there's a book I absolutely love. If you like a ghost story that's not too scary, or actually not scary at all, Linda Urban has a book called Almost There and Almost Not. And it's about this girl who has to go live with her aunt. And when she gets there, she realizes that the ghost of another aunt is also living there, and so is a ghost dog. So it's a really cool story. It's a ghost story, but not a really, really scary one. And then if you want another ghost story that's a little bit scarier and tied into history too, Justina Ireland has a book called Ophi's Ghosts that I really love.
Great. All right, thank you for those recommendations. We have a few questions about the Ranger in Time books. A couple of people are asking, if you have one, what is your favorite Ranger in Time book? Is there one?
Oh boy, I have to tell you, asking an author to choose a favorite book it's always a little bit like asking a parent to choose a favorite kid, right?
Sure.
Because I've written more than 50 books and I worked, really hard on all of them. But I do sort of have an answer for this. My favorite Ranger in Time book, I am a little bit partial to book 7 in the series. And what are the odds of book 7 being right where I can grab it? It's not going to be. But I love book 7 in this series. That's D-Day Battle on the Beach. Because that one is a little bit different from the other books in the series. Most of the books in the Ranger in Time series have Ranger as the main character and then one human character too. And D-Day Battle on the Beach has Ranger and 2 human characters whose stories intertwine. One of those characters is a Jewish boy who's been sent from Paris to live in the countryside. Because with the Nazis occupying Paris, it's not safe for Jewish families there. And then the other main character is an American serviceman, a part of the Barrage Balloon Battalion, an African-American serviceman who was part of a real unit that was instrumental in the success of D-Day, but never got credit for it at the time because that was before the civil rights movement in America, and it was an all African-American unit. So they never really got the credit they deserved. So those 2 stories kind of intertwine with Rangers, and that probably makes that one my favorite.
Okay. Interesting. Also, another question about that series, are there going to be any more Ranger in Time books coming out?
There are no plans for more Ranger in Time books right now. I never say never, but right now there are 12 books in the series. I will say that if you loved Ranger in Time and you're feeling a little salty about the fact that there are no more books, check out the History Smasher series, because I hear from a lot of Ranger in Time fans who are absolutely devouring the History Smashers books now.
All right. Someone's saying, I love History Smashers. So we have a fan out there. Lots of fans. All right. Someone has they say, I love your books. Can you tell us more about your critique group and how you work with them to make your books?
Sure. So I don't have an organized critique group that meets on a regular schedule. What I have is a handful of friends, probably 5 or 6 friends, and who are writers, and we all swap manuscripts. So just the way if you're a student and you're working on a piece of writing, you might swap papers with a classmate to get ideas for how to make your writing better. We do that as authors. We trade papers, right? When we write a manuscript, we finish it, and I'll send it to, my friend Linda Urban, or I'll send it to another friend and say, hey, can you give me ideas for how to make this better? Or what do you think of this first chapter? So we do that all the time, and we give one another critiques. And I have, like I said, it's not a group that meets. There are people who have critique groups that meet once a month, and you bring your 10 pages to get critique that month. Ours is a little bit more informal than that, mostly because we're all publishing regularly. And so we might not have 10 pages this week, but we might need you to read a whole manuscript in a month to get feedback on a publishing schedule. So that's how that works. It's invaluable. I would not be able to publish books without feedback from other authors in my community.
Okay, great. We have a question. Do you have any advice for aspiring authors who want to write for middle grades?
Yeah, I do. And it kind of is the same whether you want to write middle grade novels or picture books or whatever. The first piece of advice is to read and read and read and read and read. Just devour as many books as you possibly can. I have a lot of people who will come to me and say, I want to write picture books. And the first thing I do is send them to the library, because the best education for writing picture books is to read hundreds of picture books published in the last 5 years, especially. And the best education for writing middle grade novels is to read lots and lots of middle grade novels, and to read like a writer, which is to say, when I pick up my book later on that I'm reading right now, I'm going to be reading like a reader. I'm going to sit down on the porch. I'm going to have my glass of iced tea, and I'm going to be reading to be carried away, right? To be swept away the way we do when we're reading for fun in the summertime. When we're reading like a writer, we might read that book like a reader first, and then go back to read it like a writer, and to kind of pull it apart and say, okay, how come I couldn't stop reading at the end of every chapter? How did that author do that? How come I felt like that fantasy world was real, like I could live in it? How did that author do that? How did they build that world? You go back and you really pay attention to those details. I will often read and make notes about that. So that's another thing I recommend. In schools, I used to be a teacher, and we talk a lot about mentor texts, which sometimes a teacher will show you a mentor text and say, look at the way this author used sensory details. Now you try that. Well, as authors, we do that all the time. We will study middle grade mysteries, for example, and really pull them apart and say, how did that author do that? And what does that mean for my work? So I think both of those things are great ways to learn the craft of writing for kids.
The next question is related to your notebook. They're asking, what would you do if you didn't have your notebook with you and an idea came to you?
So I didn't actually come clean on this. The day I was on that school field trip with the tracks in the snow, I forgot my notebook at school. And I had one piece of paper in my winter coat pocket, and it was the attendance list. It was the list of students I was supposed to not lose in the woods. And so I got back to the bus and I took attendance, and I had a miniature golf pencil in my pocket as well. So it literally was on the back of the attendance list with this stub of a pencil that I wrote the first draft of Over and Under the Snow. So there's always something. I mean, you
Right.
do forget your notebook from time to time. I have written ideas in on napkins and paper towels. I've written on my hand in Sharpie. I use my phone a lot. Like if I'm
Yeah.
driving, I'll say, "Hey Siri, make a note," and she'll say,
Right.
"What?" And so I'll dictate like that. There's always some way you can get an idea down.
Sure. Yeah, especially in this age, there's lots of options. That's great. Someone's asking about the process for making longer chapter books. Do you use an outline ever? How does that work for you?
I do. You hear a lot about different styles of writing.
Mhm.
Um, and you hear about people who are plotters who like to make a very strict outline and follow it. And then you hear what people sometimes call pantsers, which are flying by the seat of your pants and you're just going to wing it. And I'm probably somewhere in between those two. I always want to have an outline, like I always make an outline, but what happens is I also let the characters lead. So if I'm writing along and I get a better idea than my outline, I throw away my outline and I make a new outline. And then I write some more and I follow that outline until I have another better idea. And then I throw away that outline and make a new outline. So I outline, but with great flexibility.
Okay, great. A couple comments. They say, thank you for today. Pura vida. We are from Costa Rica. So
Oh,
someone else is
it's
saying, thank
one
you
of
so
my
much.
favorite places I've ever visited. It's
It
beautiful.
looks
Love
magical.
the people too.
Someone says, we're inspired to check out your other books. We've read the Ranger ones and we enjoy your stories. Keep on creating and adventuring.
Thank
All
you.
right, so let's see. Someone's asking, you talked about liking dangerous animals when you were younger. Have you ever had a pet snake?
I have not. No, I
No.
have thought about it, but I have not. I really mostly like to see snakes in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
And I've
Yeah.
done a lot of that. You have some great snakes in Florida. Last winter, I actually went on what's called a herp walk, like herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians.
Mhm.
And I went out with a naturalist in one of the cruise strand areas. And
Okay.
really cool. We were looking actually behind the bark on these pine snags and
Mm-hmm.
found like little corn snakes and just
Oh,
really
wow.
really cool snakes. So I love snakes, but I like to see them in the wild, which is
Yeah, yeah,
probably the
that
best
makes
place
sense.
for them.
All right. Someone says they can't wait to read Over and Under in the Rainforest. And also, someone is excited about Over and Under the Waves. I know you gave us a sneak peek, so thank you for that. Um, okay, so someone wants to know, have you ever started a book and then put it on pause and then came back to it later to finish it?
Yes, that is the novel that I am working on right now.
Uh-huh.
Is that book, to be honest with
Oh,
you. It's the working title is The Trouble with Heroes. And it is going to be a multimodal novel. So it's going to be told largely in verse, but also with documents like newspaper articles and report cards and stuff. Similar to my novel Breakout, which is also like that. So
okay.
here it is. I didn't talk about this because the presentation, you can only talk about so many books, but
Sure.
this novel is multimodal. It's told entirely through documents. So it's told as a collection of letters and recorded conversations and comic
Great.
strips that one guy draws and text messages and poems and petitions, and all those documents come together to tell the novel. The book that I'm working on right now is similar, although it's largely, many of those documents are poetry.
Mhm.
And it's a book that I started 6 years ago. And then I thought, no, I'm not a good enough writer to do this book right now. So I set it aside. And then I came back to it again and I was like, yeah, now I got this. And I was like, no, I don't. And I set it aside. But I think I got it this time. So
Okay.
if we visit again next summer and I'm like, nope, you'll know. But no, I think I'm probably about a third of the way through, and I think I have it this time. That book is called The Trouble with Heroes.
Okay. Trouble with Heroes. We'll look for that. This next question, I guess, is kind of related to maybe that and finding inspiration and maybe dealing with writer's block. How do you deal with writer's block, and do you ever experience that?
Yeah, I think all writers get stuck sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Calling it writer's block makes it sound like I don't know, so solid and immovable.
Right.
I like
That's a
to
good.
think of it as like, molasses instead of, stone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think all writers get stuck sometimes, and I'm no exception to that. And what I do about it really depends on the kind of stuck I am, if that makes sense. There
Mhm.
are days when I get stuck on a project and I will realize it's because I need to go back and do more research. If I'm working on a History Smasher series and I'm having trouble describing something or in a way that's kid friendly, it might be because I haven't done enough research yet to really get a handle on it myself, that I can, explain it in a million different ways. So sometimes my solution is going back to do more research. Sometimes my solution is getting up and going for a walk around the block or a bike ride. That I find that fresh air and getting my
Mhm.
blood pumping a little bit is very good for me as a writer. Sometimes my solution is to go upstairs and see if there are any chocolate chips in the cupboard. That can help. It really depends on the kind of stuck. And also sometimes I find that going back to an earlier phase in the writing process, getting off the computer and just doing some brainstorming in my notebook can help too.
Okay. Yeah, someone was asking, do you write your books by hand sometimes or on a typewriter or a computer? It sounds like a combination, but do you have a preferred method
Yeah,
for that?
um, it depends on a few things. Typically, in a usual regularly, my books will start with a scribble in my notebook, but move pretty quickly onto my computer. I use a program called Scrivener that is actually it's actually screenwriting software. So it's what some people use to write for television and movies, but it works really well for lots of different kinds of books too. But I also have, in addition to my regular notebook, I have. I mean, I've got piles of notebooks back here, and
Okay.
I have project notebooks too. So I have little ones that I'll take when I go hiking. The book that I'm working on right now, The Trouble with Heroes, has a big connection to hiking, and so I've written bunches of that book on mountains. It's
Right.
working better. It's where I'm feeling the story the most. So I'm writing more of that book in notebooks by hand than I have at probably any other project.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, we have time for one or two more questions. Someone is asking, and you may have mentioned this during your presentation, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer?
So I know a lot of people get asked, a lot of authors get asked this question. Their answer is, I've wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. And that is not me. When I was a little kid, I wanted to be a marine biologist because I
Mhm.
loved walking on the beach and looking for
Yeah.
shells and picking up hermit crabs. I still love that. I hope I get to do a book about that someday. But I didn't, I grew up in a really small town. We never had an author visit our school. My parents didn't know, I didn't know any authors. My parents' friends had really one of three jobs. You could work at the hospital, you could work in the schools, or you could work at the Fisher Price toy factory making little school
Okay.
buses that drove around with little people in them. So I love to read, but I honestly didn't realize that being an author was a job that they would give you. It never occurred to me that anyone would pay me to write stories. So even when I was out of high school and I was going to college, I met with my guidance counselor, and he said, "Oh, Kate, you're doing well. You're going to go to college. What do you want to study? What do you like to do?" And I said, "I like to write stories." And he said, "Good, you can be a journalist." So that is a different kind of storytelling than some of what I do now, right? I write some fiction now. Journalism is when you write the true news of the day for a newspaper or a magazine or a television news show. And so that was what I actually studied in college. That's what my undergraduate degree is in. And I worked in television news for 7 years before I went back to school to get my teaching degree. And then I spent 15 years teaching middle school, sharing lots and lots of stories with my students. And that was when I kind of rediscovered my own love of storytelling and writing fiction. So my path to this was kind of a windy one.
That's a great path, though. You learned a lot. Those skills are probably obviously are coming into play when you're writing your books. All
For
right.
sure.
Yeah. Well, that's all we have for questions. Those were great questions, everyone. Thank you so much. And Kate, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really enjoyed having you here. We love your books, and it's an honor just to spend some time with you and hear about what you think about them.
Oh my gosh,
Uh,
thank you so much. It's an honor for me to be part of your summer reading program. I'm still very much that kid who haunted the library when I was 8 and 9 and 10 years old. I just couldn't get enough, and I always loved that the librarians let me wander around and read everything, even in the grown-up section. And so I will owe a debt to libraries forever, and I'm delighted and honored to be a part of your summer reading program. I hope everybody has a great summer. I hope you find
uh,
books and have some really great adventures.
Thank you. That's so nice to hear. All right, everyone. Now, if you want to contact our library, you can call us at 813-273-3652 or go online at hcplc.org/contact. Also on our website, you can share your library story, and you can also look at our calendar of events. You can find out about more virtual events. We have another author event coming up in late June with author G. Mary, but there's other stuff going on too. So I encourage you to go there and take a look, okay? And with that, I'll say thank you again to you, Kate, and thank you for joining us, everybody. We really enjoyed this, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.